Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 406 of CryptoBiography, and it's called End of the OotiniCast. And so we had the last OotiniCast. It was episode 509, so I still have more than 100 more episodes before I catch up with the OotiniCast. The only reason I'm catching up this quickly is because the OotiniCast started as a weekly, and then we went to a bi-weekly. I don't know the exact number, but after a couple of hundred episodes or so. And so for most of its run, it was an every other week podcast. And so I just wanted to talk about that, some of the thoughts I had, and why I did it, and what the plans are, and so on. And so myself and the co-hosts, got 509 episodes done. We did several, talks with the developers of Star Wars: The Old Republic, a couple of other interesting interviews, like Tasia Valenza, one of the voice actors in SWTOR, stuff like that. And it was a fun run. It was a long run, and it was a good run, and it came to an end. So why did we end it, or why did I end it, really? Because Kitty was always my co-host, and he was an awesome co-host. He was really, really fun. But he always felt that, since the OotiniCast had been going already for about 9 or 10 years when he joined, that it was always kind of my baby, basically. So what had happened was just over a long period of time, if you're going to keep going on any sort of project, there has to be, you really need there to be a really good reason to keep going. And for a long time there was, and the game is still fun. I am still playing the game. I actually really appreciate the devs and everything they've done over time. But when it came down to it, it was kind of time to find a way to sort of gracefully end it. That was sort of in my head for a long time. Don't know exactly when, but probably more than a year or so. It felt like it felt like I was continuing just to be continuing. And I don't like that. I don't really think it's fair to the audience, or fair to myself, or even to my co-host Kitty Kisses. And we were able to still get some good stuff out. We still got one of our dev interviews in the last year, and we got the interview with Tasia in the last year. So we did some good work. But when it came to like the week-to-week podcasts, we were having fun. We were doing what we always had been doing, but it never really. It started to feel like I was like I was pushing on just to be pushing on. Like I was, you know what I mean? Like there was a certain sort of pride that I'd been doing the podcast for so long, and this was the last podcast that had actually been in existence since before the game launched. And I didn't really want to see that go away. And I knew that I couldn't really just pass it along to someone else either. That just wouldn't be the same. And then what happened was, we had the vacation coming up, and I talked about this on the last show of the OotiniCast, is we have a vacation coming up. We're actually going to see Tio, my original co-host of the OotiniCast. He's in Australia. We're going to Australia and New Zealand for a while. And it's going to be long enough vacation that we're going to actually have to sort of pick things back up when we if I was going to continue the OotiniCast. You have to keep, whenever a podcast, sort of has any sort of break, you have to everything sort of has to get picked back up. Just to let your regular audience know that you're still around, but let other people know that, sort of semi-regular audiences, know that you actually didn't just disappear off the face of the earth. You're actually there, you're actually back, and so on. And I realized I just didn't want to. I think it was time. And, but we're going to keep going with the CryptoBiography. I really I really like CryptoBiography. I'm enjoying it a lot. I feel like it does a couple of things for me that I appreciate. And one of the ones is it's sort of related. It gives me a place to have a voice for anything I write. But also, more importantly, it pushes me to write. And I really appreciate that because over the years, I was an English major with a creative writing emphasis in college. And but I was never very smart about it. And so what ended up happening was after I graduated, I really stopped writing without the push of there being a reason to write. And, in other words, basically the classes. It was very hard for me to sort of make myself write creatively. The few times over the years, it sort of happened a few times that I would write. I wrote basically a couple of novels, essentially. They never published properly, but I was pretty happy with them, actually. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But the only reason they got written in the first place is because I found someone in my life who I could say, okay, I'm going to write now. And if you can just take this and read it, every week when I write it, I'd appreciate it. And it didn't even really matter if they read it or not. Like, yes, on some level it mattered to me, but it was more the fact that I knew that they were going to potentially read it. And so I had to have something to give to them. And that was all it took. But if I didn't have at least that, there was no reason for me to keep writing, and or at least there's no way to keep myself writing, more to the point. And so over time, like, I sort of realized, this is just not happening. Like, I want to be writing on some level, and yet I'm not writing because, and then I knew that, if I'm going to write, I have to have a reason. I have to have something pushing me every week or every other week or every month or every day or whatever it is. And someone has to either, I have to either have something to give to them. They have to want to, to receive it and occasionally read it and give feedback or whatever. And so that's what the CryptoBiography became for me. And I still appreciate that, and I still do like that. And if you are enjoying the stories, I really do appreciate that. And I'm really happy that you're enjoying them. And I'm trying to get better at it all the time and so on. And it's all good. Then it's all great then. The reason I waited, so we had the OotiniCast, but it was more than 1 week ago. So I had a regular episode before I did this episode after the OotiniCast. A couple of reasons for that. One is that I knew that the end of a story was coming, and I wanted to just finish it rather than do a couple of the episodes that it had and then have something else and then finish up the story. So instead, I made sure to finish the story last episode, and that way, I would do it, and that way the whole entire story would be together, and as opposed to all being separated. It's much easier for people to pick up the story when it's all in one, and rather when there's a bunch of interruptions. And then the other one is just that I think I knew on some level it would help me to have a little bit of distance. It turned out at the end of the episode I was getting very emotional. You can listen to the episode 509 of the OotiniCast. In the last 10 minutes, I am very choked up, and I'm thanking everyone who helped and who participated, and the people who listened, and my co-hosts and everyone else. And I was getting very choked up about it, and I wasn't really expecting to be that choked up about it as I was. I knew that I would be emotional to some degree, but I didn't realize how much that was going to rise to the surface at that time. And it was a large part of my life for quite a long time. We started, a few months before the Star Wars: The Old Republic game started. And so that was in sort of, the last half of 2011. Well, I think October was our first episode. So it was just 2 months before the game launched. So that's 2011. So that's 14 years ago. So like a long time, a long time ago. And, and of course we were working on it before that. We probably should have tried to get it out even a little bit faster and start a little earlier, but it took a little while. My co-host Tio was our tech person, and this is the first podcast he was doing. He is a computer guy. He's like he's a coder and so on. But he was more. He'd always worked for like Boeing and done some freelance stuff. And he wasn't really He wasn't like he'd ever made a podcast before for someone else or anything like that. So it was. He took his time and sort of built up a website for it. Built up sort of the bones of it, and it took a time. And then we also wanted to figure out a name and a logo and a title, and also do a couple of little test runs and stuff like that. Anyway, it took longer than we thought. So we actually started behind the scenes. We were starting in I think it was April of that year or something like that, and it just took a long time to sort of get it really going. After that, though, we got it going. We were, like I say, weekly at the beginning of the run, and it made sense actually. We went to every other week. This was maybe a while before Tia was really looking for the exit, but he had a lot of things. He started to get a lot of things going on in his life, so he was getting busier. But also enough time had passed since the launch that less and less information was coming out. When a game launches, especially a very complicated game like Star Wars: The Old Republic was and is, there's just a ton of information out there about it, and also people are talking about it. It had a huge launch. There were literally millions of people playing it. They had to do it. It was, I don't know if you've ever played Star Wars: The Old Republic or were playing it back then, but it was the launch was absolutely insane. It was very exciting too. What they did is they had some servers set up for the various areas where they're going to play the game, and in fact, people who were setting up guilds, which are basically groups of players, could they would pre-tell us which server we would be on, and our name would be reserved, and also it would just let us know to let all the people who were going to be in our guild know where you should make your characters so that you could join the guild. And so we joined our guilds, and we were on the Space Slug server, which we always referred to as the Mighty Space Slug server, and still love that server name. It's hilarious. One of my favorite things. And then we, and then there was because there's this huge explosion of people playing the game, and it literally got up into the millions. They had to keep adding all these servers. So they started with, a handful of servers. I don't know, a dozen, a couple dozen, something like that at most. They ended up with well over 100 servers, which is crazy, absolutely insane. That is a huge number of servers to be playing any game. And unfortunately, of course, what happened was a lot of these players were drawn because of couple of things. Well, a number of things. Yes, they were looking for a Star Wars MMO. That was one big thing. And then sort of tangential to that, but a little different, was the fact that it was BioWare. A lot of people knew Knights of the Old Republic, the game that they had made earlier. And it was and is considered one of the greatest Star Wars games of all time. And a lot of people were drawn by that, and just a lot of people were just sort of drawn to the idea of playing a Star Wars role-playing game of any kind. And the big deal, the difficulty is that when you have all those different reasons, what ends up happening is a lot of the people who are joining, they try it out for a while, and it's not for them. That's going to happen with every game. But also for the people who are just looking for the role-playing aspects, they basically played it through once like it was Knights of the Old Republic, and then they just left. And so what ended up happening was, the number of players exploded, and then it kind of collapsed. It didn't collapse to zero, of course. It was actually quite a big game for quite a while. And then there was a whole other thing. But they had to the point is they had to merge a bunch of the servers over time. And now it's down to just a handful of servers. There's 2 North American servers and 3 European servers, and then an Asia Pacific server, which is interesting because actually it was only those 5, and then the Asia Pacific server they've actually added recently, which is interesting. So we'll see what happens with that. Right now, the game is doing reasonably well, as I understand. One of the difficulties is that it's always been a fully voiced role-playing game, and they do a few cute things around the edges to sort of make things a little bit simpler to program and so on. But basically, almost everything, especially the main storyline, is always going to be fully voiced. But the problem is that there's been a voice actor strike for a while now, and unfortunately, the companies, the big companies out there, are just playing hardball, and it's hard for them to get any sort of decent. Because what they're wanting to do is, the voice actors don't want robotic AI versions of their voices to take over. And they don't want their voices, taken over at all, but they just don't want AI voicing, in the games either, just in general, because it's like, if the companies can sort of get away with it, then they basically won't have to pay anyone. And of course, the companies are drooling at that prospect, but it completely F's over all the voice actors and everyone who appreciates voice acting as well. So right now it's really tough because the unions know that they need to tamp down on this, because they've dealt with this really old series of agreements from a long time ago, and there's a lot of things that have happened beyond AI. There's been a lot of other things that have been happening since then in the voice acting sphere. And so it's been tough because SWTOR is known for its story, and yet they can't really advance the story very much right now because they are known for doing it via voice acting, at fully voiced cutscenes and so on, and that is not really possible while the strike is ongoing. So. Anyway, so back to it. So anyway, so we really still a very interesting game. I do wish everyone who's still making stuff for SWTOR, nothing but the best. We have some great creators doing it. Volk is wonderful. SWTORista, I would say those 2 are right at the top. And they make a lot of great guides and so on. There's Ivano, who makes guides on YouTube, mostly PvP ones. That's really good too. And then there's other people who are doing all kinds of other ones as well, and it's all really well done. And a lot of people just are really, really good at what they do. And I'm not sure what niche someone might take. It feels like we were the only ones who were doing what we were doing at the end. Early on in SWTOR's history, there was a number of podcasts that sort of basically caught up everyone with the news around SWTOR, but they all sort of faded away over time. The ones that are left that are podcasts, not other things like SWTORista and Volk, tend to be, if they're actually podcasts, then they're just mostly just general chatting and so on. It's good stuff. It can be really fun, but they don't necessarily get into the news so much, as far as I could tell. Maybe someone will sort of pick up that sort of aspect of SWTOR podcasting. That is sort of a niche that's not so well filled right now, as far as I can tell. Maybe I'm not really the one to be talking about this, because as much as I sort of try to keep up with people, it's not like I can listen to everyone's podcast every week or anything like that, or even every month. There's a lot of podcasts out there for SWTOR that I just, I have only passing familiarity with. Anyway, I've got, I really enjoyed doing SWTOR's podcast, doing the OotiniCast. Met a lot of good people along the way. Gonna miss it in a way, But now that it's done, and and I was kind of that night when like as emotional as I got that night, when we did the final OotiniCast, part of me in the back of my head is like, does this mean that I made a bad decision? I didn't think so, but I didn't expect to be as emotional as I was, and I thought, well, maybe that's something, some part of my brain telling me, that maybe I will be missing this more than I thought, or whatever. But now that a little bit of time has passed, so we have it's like 10 days, not a huge amount of time, but it's enough to sort of get a little bit of a beat on things. I feel like I did make the right decision for me. I could have pressed on doing it, but at some point it becomes almost a mistake, I would say. Like, if I'm going to do things that are creative, I really do like to have my heart in them. That's actually something I've found out about CryptoBiography. Like, I'm always interested in a story when I start writing it, but if I'm like halfway through and I'm just not enjoying the process, that's actually one of the things. And I sort of talked about this on the episode 400 episode, I believe it was, or it wasn't 400. It was the anniversary one that was a little bit before that. But in any case, it was the look back of 2024, I believe, where I sort of like realized that I sometimes rush the endings. And I think that is another reason that I sort of rush the endings, is like, if I feel like the story isn't really gelling the way I like it to, then sometimes that's another thing that sort of pushes me along. And that's not necessarily the best way to do it, because it'd be better if I sort of figure out what's wrong with the story and fix it. But at least if I'm going to wrap up the story, I try to wrap it up as best I can, and so on. But I do feel that is one of the reasons I rush myself a little bit as well. So hopefully I will still actually be streaming. I'll still stream SWTOR sometime, at least sometimes, probably the majority of the time. There's really only one other game that I play off stream, or one sort of series of games, and that's League of Legends, and some related stuff like Teamfight Tactics, which is by League of Legends, and so on. But I'm not sure how much I want to stream that either. So, but I definitely want to change my schedule, because of what I've always done with my stream is I never tried to make it like the main focus. It was always to sort of support the OotiniCast, because I always, when Tio and I started the OotiniCast, we always said, because there were some other podcasts for World of Warcraft, which was the game we were with originally, and then we saw that SWTOR was opening. We were both Star Wars fans, we were both MMO fans, and we was like, I'm really interested in this game. We ended up talking, and then we ended up making the podcast. But one of the things that we had seen happen with other World of Warcraft podcasts is that the people doing the podcast would stop playing the game, and yet they were still doing the podcast. I never really understood that. I mean, I guess World of Warcraft was kind of big enough that they were, and their podcasts were therefore big enough that they were sort of able to get maybe some sponsorship money and stuff like that, or maybe their Patreons were bigger than maybe we would have expected, that sort of thing. I don't know. But in any case, we both said, like, if we weren't playing the game, we didn't want to do the podcast. Like, we always felt that was sort of like a bad way to do a podcast. Like, if you're going to do a podcast about a game and you're presenting it as a sort of a fan podcast, and not simply like, yes, it's one thing if, like, you're doing a podcast that's just about video games in general, and then, you move on to another game. It's not always about SWTOR. That's different. But if you're doing a podcast that's specifically about SWTOR, you should be playing SWTOR. And towards the end, Tio actually was having a hard time finding enough time to play SWTOR. And so that was one of the big reasons. That was, in the end, it was the main reason was his sort of honesty and his his feelings that since he wasn't really able to play SWTOR anymore, and he wanted to, but he just didn't have the time because things are going on with his life, that he should in fact lay it down, and he did. And it was different for me though, because I was still playing SWTOR, still am playing SWTOR, and still actually enjoy SWTOR. But it's just there's some things around it, and whether I should actually, even though I'm still playing the game, if I'm not really, if my heart's not in like really making the podcast good every week, and I'm only really feeling the need to like really push when it's an unusual episode, like when we're doing the dev interview or with an interview with someone else, and if it's just like a regular week to week one, and I'm just sort of like going through the motions, at some point I feel that same way, like I'm not doing the right thing by continuing it. And so even though it upset me more than I thought it would, I think in the end it was the right thing to do. It's going to be kind of weird when I get back. So I'm going to be on this vacation. When I get back, we will, I will go back to streaming. I will probably arrange it so I'm not streaming every day, because one of the things I did notice over the last few years is that when I stream every day like this, even though I'm not necessarily doing the longest streams, it's only tends to be somewhere between 3 to 4 hours, and sometimes even less than that. But when I stream every day, the days sort of start to run into each other, and I don't really like that. And so I will probably do something that sort of more or less matches my wife's schedule better, so that I'm streaming more on days where she's working, and then take a day or two off during the week. You probably on the days that she has off, essentially. That's the general idea, but I don't have the exact schedule yet. So we'll work on that when I get back. As far as the CryptoBiography, the podcast you're listening to, obviously I'm going to keep writing, keep going and so forth. On my vacation, though, you might be asking, like, well, you're going to have this long vacation. What are you going to... I'm going to do what I've been doing, and that is going back through old stories that took multiple episodes, combining them so that they can be either in one episode or in at least a minimal number of episodes. I tend to write a certain length every week. I sort of have a personal goal, which tends to end up making the podcast rather short, but, sort of semi-useful. And so we have a couple of... there's a couple of really long episodes of really long stories coming up, however. So I have to figure out exactly how much I want to chop them up. It won't be all in one, though, because that would be too long. It'd be a huge episode. So we will probably break it up into 2 or maybe even 3 pieces. The problem is I've got 2 really long ones like in a row. So I think what I may end up doing is, but the first one is even longer. So I'm probably going to end up chopping the first one into like 3 pieces, which I've never done before. I've never chopped it into less than or more than 2 rather. This one is long though, so we're going to probably make it into 3 episodes. That's going to be Snake Magic, which I really like that story, and never felt really rushed on that one, and had a lot of interesting sort of world building and so on. Snake Magic, and then instead of because I only need 4 of them, then we're going to do the Isle of Bronze later at some other time, and I'll do another one of the shorter ones that happened after that. Usually I do them in the order of the things that of what I'm doing, but in this case we're going to do it a little differently. So anyway, thank you for listening. This ended up being kind of quite a bit longer than I expected to be. I'm going to get going on the editing probably a little bit tonight, and then hopefully get it done tomorrow, and then that gives me a little bit of time to do the other non-podcast things before I head out. When I get back, it's actually going to be on a Sunday, so that when I get back, that episode will probably be a little late, but I will undoubtedly be talking about the vacation that we're going on right now. There should be lots to talk about, and thank you for listening. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Blue Sky or Mastodon, and thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2025, Brandon Starr, all rights reserved, and Not that it really matters in this instance, but characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.